Greetings, everybody. This is Dr. Jonathan Ellerby, and welcome to another 12 at 12 Live. Every day at 12 o'clock Mountain Time, USA, I am doing about 12 to 16 minutes of living wisdom for times of change, uncertainty, pandemics, and let's face it, hopefully most of this is really useful for everyday life. Today, the single most important thing I ever teach couples, teams, or communities about having a healthy, thriving relationship. It sounds like a gimmick to say it is the most important thing you need to know if your relationship is not only going to survive but thrive, but I'm telling you, it's it. I've worked with, no exaggeration, thousands of people over the last 25 years. I have been doing this a long time, and I've had a lot of great teachers, a lot of great mentors, and I've learned a lot from the people that I've worked with. And there's no question, time and time again, this is the most important principle that couples, families, teams, communities understand if they are going to create lasting love and the strength of togetherness. So please check this out, and I'm going to invite you to share this. Before I go on, I do want to let you know that if you don't know who I am or what I'm up to, I'd love you to check out my webpage. It's jonathanellerby.com is the website. And this week, I'm going to be giving out a free copy of my new book. That's it, no strings attached. It is the whole book. It is a real book. It's not a promotional gimmick. It's about spiritual experience. I want everybody to have it, especially in this time of crisis, even though I actually planned this before the crisis happened. I think there couldn't be anything better right now than to immerse yourself in the awakening to the reality that we are more than what we have. We are more than what we do. And this book called Spiritual Experience is absolutely about that. So without any further delay, let's take a breath, and we're just going to dive into the most important relationship principle that I would love for you to understand. So let your eyes close, just take a moment, big breath in, and then something like a sigh, big release out. Just let go of any of the busyness of your mind, your day, your heart. Let yourself come to a quiet place. For this short time, we just want to be centered and open and calm and curious. When you breathe out as far as you can till you feel your stomach muscles contract, and then take a nice cleansing breath back in. Just imagine you're breathing in life force and light and energy, and then long exhale. Feel yourself slowing down and settling down. And from this quiet place, we remember that this is the inner truth, this quiet, open, calm, and curious place that we can relate to each other from. Our relationships, our decisions, ourselves. So, let's go. Typically, and I'm going to use couples as the focus of my example today, but this is really essential for any kind of relationship in the world. In fact, this is such an important principle that I teach whole workshops and classes just on this one principle. And what I like to call it is the third thing. I'm writing it down. The third thing. Some of you have heard me say this before, and yes, on Facebook, this is backwards. The thing that's critical if you're experiencing a struggle, stress, division in your relationship is you need to understand that our culture has an upside down understanding of how relationships work. So the most common thing that we experience either internally or sometimes even with coaches and therapists is we think of things like this, me and you. Now, again, this is backwards, but it doesn't really matter. You just need to know there's two people, and you're one, and they are the other, okay? Easy enough. Now, the other, by the way, could also be your team at work. It could also be your family. It could also be your community, your synagogue, your mosque, your church. It could also be, your country. Or, and we're going to finish with this, it could also be your planet. The problem is that most of our coaches and most of our workshops want to build relationships like this, okay? So what they say is, look, I want you, Johnny, to go home and think about what you really want from this relationship, what you really want in this relationship. And I want you, Sammy, notice the gender neutral name, I want you, Sammy, to go home and think about what you want in this relationship. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to see how we can put that all together and make it all work. Let's build one big, beautiful relationship. That is a recipe for disaster, okay? Because that is not the consciousness from which relationships are built. Successful relationships, and again, this can be parent and child, lovers, two countries. If the conversation starts off with what I want versus what you want, then the energy, the attitude, and the intention is rooted in conflict and division. Now think about this. You could even spend a whole week, weekends, exploring your heart, searching your soul. How can I create more, find more, feel more with this other person, party, right? Group. But if it starts with a reflection on me, with listening to me, if it begins with what I want, then the very thinking that goes into building that picture of success is individualistic. And by definition, it's competitive. By definition, it will breed problems further down into the system. So here's what we do. We ask people not to come up with what each of them wants. We flip it around. Okay? We flip it around. And what we want it to look like instead, is that we want it to look like two people working on one vision. What do we want this relationship to look like? What do we want this relationship to feel like? What do we want this team or trade partnership or whatever it is, what do we want it to be like? You start with the we, okay? If you start with the we, then you have a consciousness big enough for the me. Now think about this, please. This is the critical, essential breakdown we are seeing in the world today. Anytime there are two parties in a relationship and one is thinking me in its effort to build a we, they are by definition beginning with a consciousness too small to accomplish what's intended. Okay? Family, relationships, love relationships, businesses, countries. I can say it 1,000 times. You get the picture. If it starts with what do we want, meaning the me that I'm a part of, the team, the group, or just what do I want, the consciousness is too small. By definition, it's a me. It's not big enough to hold a we. And so what happens is that when you go as a me into the dialogue about creating the we, then you cannot help but experience it as conflict or the other trying to take something from you, or even more so, your emotional history will exploit the differences of opinion with fear, with anxiety, with uncertainty. Do you get that? Now, if you do it the other way around, then by definition, the thinking that you begin with is we thinking. We thinking, by definition, is collaborative. It's communicative. It is cooperative. And then what you do is you go from the picture that you create together. What do we want this relationship to look like, to feel like? What's missing? That's a dialogue. You create the us together. And then the second conversation is, okay, now that we agree that this is what we both want, what do we as individuals need to make that realistic, to make that safe, to make that practical? So here's a great example. With couples, it might be, well, we want to laugh and have fun and have date nights and go out more. That's fine. In that context, if you ask, what do you need to make that realistic? And one person says, well, I also need some alone time to recharge my battery. I also need some space after work so I can get my head together to serve this vision. Then that request for an individual need feels good, sounds good, looks good, and the other will be likely to cooperate because it serves something you have both agreed to moving towards. On the other hand, when you flip it that other way, and you start off with saying, what do you want in a relationship? And someone says, well, I need time alone. I need space after work. It immediately sounds off-putting. It sounds selfish. It sounds disconnecting. The beautiful thing is when you start any relationship next step, facing any relationship challenge with a conversation about the we, then any discussion about what the me inside it needs has purpose. It has focus. It is serving something greater. And that's the third thing. The third thing is to recognize that we are always in relationship to something greater. Our neighborhood, our health, our humanity, our relationship as a couple. I remember years ago, a very, very wonderful author and extraordinary business development consultant, Mark Samuel, was teaching me. He's a good friend of mine now, but he was a mentor of mine at the time. And he was talking about how teams come together. And in organizations, there's always this challenge of silos. And silos is the kind of phenomena in organizations where individual teams compete with others for resources so that eventually they can do a good job and all serve the organization. But he pointed out that when all teams share a sense of responsibility for the success of the organization first, then it creates a new context in which they problem solve, share resources, and communicate about individual needs. The same thing happens in all relationships. When we have a third thing that we are a part of, and we put that third thing first, then we are capable of doing extraordinary things. And this is what we're seeing in the world today. When we see frontline healthcare workers, delivery people, long-term care workers, people putting something else, someone else ahead of themselves, and that allows extraordinary energy, support, endurance to come forward in a way that doesn't happen when we are stuck looking at ourselves, thinking about ourselves, and beginning our problem solving in relationships with ourselves. There is a lot more to say about the third thing and the power to transform a relationship, but I promise to keep this brief. We're just a minute or two over 12 minutes. But I really want you to take this home with you, share this wherever you can and however you can, because the idea is that when we think with a we consciousness first, it creates the energy, the context, and the communication platform, you might say, in which we can begin to talk about what each other needs to get there. As a closing example, I remember Mark actually said to me one day, this was probably 15 years ago. We were working together. And I told him, that I was ending a really beautiful and wonderful relationship that I was in, but somehow it just wasn't coming together in a way that would last the rest of my life. And he said, well, it makes sense because you guys clearly love each other. And I thought, what? I thought you just said it made sense. And he said, yeah, well, a relationship isn't about loving each other. It's not about liking each other. It's about being committed to something more. There's a we that you have to put before me. And he pointed out that you guys love each other, but I don't see you loving and protecting your relationship. And that means it's time to either have that conversation about what is the greater good that we serve, or how do we lovingly support each other to move on. And I'm happy to say that in my home now, this is what unites us in the most difficult times when we face, through the pandemic, the loss of work, the loss of income, the loss of social network, and obviously the tensions that rise in families in such settings. My wife and I make sure that the relationship comes first, and then we each find our place and our needs second. The same for the family, the same for the communities we serve. And to close, I invite you to consider the same for our common future, for our humanity, for our relationship to life. Put spirit first. Put life first. Put the human community first. And then, once you've embraced the we, ask yourself about the me and see where it takes you. So thank you for your time. I look forward to connecting with you more soon. If this was helpful, please share it. Remember, I'm giving away a free book this week, No Strings Attached, Spiritual Experience. It's going to be on my website, jonathanellerby.com. And I am doing an 8-minute meditative prayer every night now, 8 p.m. Mountain Time, USA. Again, thank you for your time, your attention. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.